my name is Jo, and this is my mom. I'm studying to be a teacher, and my mom has over 30 years of experience working with students with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And there's something that's really touched both of our lives that we need you all to be a part of.
So I want you to start by thinking back to when you were in school. Really, think back. Do you remember who your best friend was? Do you remember how important it was to have friends, to feel like you belonged? So I'm going to tell you some stories. Emily has Down syndrome and she's in the 1st grade. Emily loves to talk, but she's difficult to understand, so she uses a computer device to talk. Because of her learning differences, Emily spends her entire day in a separate classroom. But not a lot of learning happens for Emily because she spends most of her time trying to figure out how to escape that special education classroom and join other little girls who like to talk about princesses and Disney movies. And then she's taken back to her special education classroom. The next story I want to tell you is about a little boy named Joseph. Joseph's in the 3rd grade and he has autism. We don't really know how much Joseph understands, and he doesn't speak. Joseph spends his entire day alone in his classroom. He's the only student. Except at lunchtime. At lunch, he's allowed to go down and be with other children. And you know, when I observed Joseph, he watched those other children so intently, and I knew Joseph was learning because he was imitating them. But Joseph didn't get to sit at the same table with the other children because the parents of the other children had asked that Joseph not sit at their table. The next story I want to tell you is about Sarah. She's a 16-year-old in high school. She has an intellectual disability, and she doesn't speak, but Sarah communicates. When I met Sarah, she pointed at my scarf and smiled, and I knew I had gotten a compliment. Sarah lights up when other girls her age talk to her, but the only time she even sees other students her age is when she passes them in the hallway, walking down to the lunchroom to pick up the trash that they've left behind. Because that's part of Sarah's educational plan, is to pick up trash. So my last story is about a young man with Down syndrome who graduated high school and wanted to go to college. And he knew he could go to college because he had done so well in high school. He was in band, he was in choir, he was an Eagle Scout. But he couldn't pass the college entrance exams. So he got all his courage up and he stood in front of a board of faculty members and he tried to explain to them that with some extra support he could do it. But he was told by those faculty members that they couldn't have students like him in their classrooms. So these are all true stories, and they're not unique. I have seen versions of these stories again and again and again. Because we systematically segregate students with disabilities, especially with intellectual disabilities. It's just common practice.
Great. And this segregation and, marginalization of folks with disabilities happens in our schools and continues throughout our societies. But the good news is we do know a better way, and we're trying to make that happen. And then that way is inclusion. Inclusion means we're not just putting everyone in the same classroom, which is maybe a good start, but is really saying, how do we value every member of this community, give them the support so that they can really reach their high expectations. And we're not just expecting them maybe just to pick up trash in the hallways. We're saying, I see you as a whole person. I support you to reach that person that you are. And it's valuable to our whole community when we practice that together. That's inclusion, and that's why we're here today. I'm a teacher. I believe everyone can learn. And I know that inclusion is a way to get there. The research proves it. We have data since 1992, which is older than me, and then modern data that also supports that inclusion for students with disabilities, intellectual and developmental disabilities, not only improves their social outcomes and their academic outcomes, but for all learners in that classroom, they have better attendance, higher self-esteem, and everyone has better academic outcomes. So we know that inclusion is the way to move forward.
So I have some more stories to tell you. Just last semester, I met a special education teacher who collaborated with a general education teacher to include a third grade boy with autism. His name is Samuel. They found every opportunity for Samuel to be a meaningful part of that classroom. They provided him some support, some predictable routines, some visual schedules, clear expectations, things we all like, right? And he quickly became part of that classroom. Samuel had never been in a general education classroom. He had always been segregated. But within that first semester, Samuel, who had never spoken before, found his voice. He started talking. He made friends. Yay! There's an elementary school in Colorado Springs that has decided to fully include every student 100% of the time. So this amazing team has created personalized learning plans for everyone in their school. It's a public school. They serve 350 students. So these kids are all aware of what they can do. The team focuses on the students' abilities. So when you walk in, it's not grouped to here's the smart kids and here are the struggling learners, but every student knows what they can do, and they're supported in their abilities. The focus is not on compliance or conformity. I've been to the school several times, and I just get so excited. So everyone I've ever met has heard about Trailblazer Elementary. There are school districts across the states that are providing professional development for their entire districts, because these administrators realize that if they take all those critical resources, those people with all the strategies and expertise from the special education classroom and they put it in the general education classroom, everyone benefits. There are universities across the nation that are welcoming students with intellectual disabilities because they value their human potential. They're allowing students and supporting students to take the same college courses with the same high expectations and the same rigor, and these students are following their dreams. They're looking to get the jobs that they want to have.
So there's a really important theory by Bell Hooks called the center margin theory. This theory applies to embracing a lot of diversity in our society, but if you'll stick with me, the theory says that there's power holders in the center of a circle. These power holders determine a lot of our systems, the structures, the rules, and the needs that are being met, because the power holders get to decide, and they're usually reflecting the needs they need met. But Bell Hooks taught us that the folks that are marginalized on this circle, if you instead focus on their rights and their needs, everyone else in the circle is going to have their needs met and their rights met. So we know that when we focus on inclusion of the folks that are most systemically marginalized, we're not only going to have everyone else's needs and rights met through whatever supports those might be, but also having those people as more inclusive and valued part of our community just makes it better for everyone. So growing up, I saw Mom work with lots of different students, and I got to see them blossom into who they were going to be, and I saw them really valued for who they are. And that really impacted me and my value of education and how I see the world and value the people around me. So that's why her and I are on stage today. We don't identify with intellectual or developmental disabilities ourselves, but what's important is we know that we have power in the system to be advocates, to be allies, and we don't think this change of shaking up the status quo needs to fall just with those with disabilities. All of us, in whatever system we live or work in, have some stake, have some power, and have some voice, and we can use that to create a more diverse and inclusive society.
So if you're a teacher or you run a program and you don't see people with disabilities in your classroom or in your program, ask why. Go to those people in power and shake up the status quo. If you're an employer and you have never thought of hiring somebody with disabilities, know that you can. There are transition specialists in every school district, and they'll put systems and processes in place that'll just help all your employees.
Right. So even thinking if you're a parent, just going back to our example with Joseph, don't you want your child to be the one who says, come, sit at my lunch table? Or if Emily is in your classroom and she runs out, know that she's communicating something to you. It might not be with words. Lastly, if you see Sarah and her goal is to pick up trash when her other peers are receiving a completely different educational opportunity, you can be a person that starts asking questions, that starts stepping in. Sometimes we sit back because we have fear or we're not sure, how do I engage that person? Well, that's because our society hasn't given us a lot of practice to be integrated and inclusive. So we need to understand what are our self-biases and self-educate ourselves to move beyond those biases so that we can better know our role in making the inclusive society that we want to see.
So we're not just asking you to tolerate people with disabilities or to accept people with disabilities. We're asking you to engage people with disabilities.
So, if we value a diverse society, we value a community where everyone is valued, it's going to take all of us, and the time to start is now.
Good job.